In your column in the Australian Financial Review this week, you picked up on the discussion about judicial impartiality. That's been the subject of a recent report by the Australian Law Reform Commission. The principle is, of course, that courts must not only be fair, they must be seen to be fair, because if people want to retain their confidence in the law, they have to see the law as impartial. Attorney General Mark Dreyfus is proposing that judges should be selected by an independent panel rather than by the Parliament to ensure that they remain independent. Now, some people might buy that logic, but I don't think you do. Why not?
Well, it sounds good in practice. People will say that independence equals transparency. But if we look at the details, that just doesn't wash. When you take away the ability to select judges from accountable politicians who, if you're not happy with the job they do, you have the chance to vote accordingly and give them the punt at the next election, and instead give it to a panel of bureaucrats who are never held accountable for what they do, but who all carry with them political beliefs and allegiances and values that are never made plain to the people who are potentially up for selection or to the wider Australian community, you're not actually getting more transparency, you're getting less. You don't know the criteria or the values that are being applied by the people who are selecting, and you can't hold them accountable if you don't like what they do. I find it really interesting that the Australian Law Reform Commission's report into judicial impartiality and judicial bias, which I might note mostly contained recommendations to the courts and to judges about how to improve their practice in a way that was generally quite constructive, was seized upon by Labor Attorney General Mark Dreyfus as a chance to sort of stick the boot in over coalition processes around judicial appointments. But there was nothing unusual about the way the coalition went about doing this. The method used was exactly the method that this democracy has used for all of its existence. And in being transparent about looking for particular judicial methodologies and principles of judicial decision-making in a person before you appoint them, that's really just making sure that you're getting, for Australians, a judicial methodology that is going to do the right thing by the law for Australians. That's not interference. That's not anything inappropriate. That's actually doing the job of a minister properly in an accountable way and in a way that best serves the interests of Australians.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, making Parliament the only authority that can deal with the appointment of judges it's a principle that goes back more than 3 centuries. It's the principle that no judge can be removed except by the will of both houses of Parliament. It began with the Act of Settlement in 1781 and ensured that judges could not be interfered with by the King, the Prime Minister, or anybody else, any independent committee of bureaucrats, for example. It freed judges to fearlessly and impartially declare the law of the land. Why would we want to mess with such a principle? Am I just being an old conservative again?
Nothing wrong with old conservatives, Nick, but I think what's happened here is that there have been some controversial decisions delivered by judges at various levels, whether we think about some of the environmental activism we've seen from judges like Justice Bromberg in the federal court, or some of the more controversial decisions that we've seen out of the High Court in recent years. There has been public discussion and in some quarters criticism of what you and I call judicial activism, the times when judges dip into making political decisions and making law rather than simply applying the law that's already on the books. When they're criticised for that, I think that gets a few people a little uncomfortable. And it's important that we draw a distinction here. Judicial tenure, judicial independence doesn't mean immunity from criticism. It doesn't mean you can never be scrutinised for making a decision that has adverse implications for our community. What it means is that you have the protection of the institution of tenure. That means you can't be removed from doing that job because you've made a controversial decision. There is a world of difference, and it's important that those on the bench understand that the enormous privileges they have don't also mean they can never be criticised.